No goat left behind, they say war is hell, but sometimes it's downright hilarious. I've seen a lot in my years as an American soldier, but nothing quite like the goat incident. Let me tell you about the time a goat nearly cost me a stripe, and won my platoon's hard start. It was the summer of 2011, and I was stationed at a dusty forward operating base in southern Afghanistan. Our outpost, just a few tents and sandbag walls under the brutal sun, was home to about 20 U.S. Army soldiers. We were smack in the middle of Kandahar province, surrounded by endless dunes and distant jagged mountains. The days were mostly long stretches of boredom broken up by moments of adrenaline. We kept ourselves sane with dark humor, strong coffee, and whatever silly diversions we could find. One blistering afternoon, a sentry on the perimeter radioed, Sarge, you might want to see this." I jogged over, expecting trouble. Instead, I found Private First Class Donnelly, looking baffled and pointing beyond the concertina wire. "We've got a local intruder, Sergeant," he said, struggling to keep a straight face. I followed his finger and had to laugh. Standing just outside our wire was a little goat, head cocked to one side, bleating at us like he owned the place. "Well, I'll be damned," I muttered, lowering my rifle. The goat was scrawny, mostly white with a black patch over one eye, and looked just as surprised to see us as we were to see it. A breeze kicked up dust as we stared at each other across the wire. Goats were common in these parts. Local farmers kept herds, but it was odd to see one wandering alone. There was no shepherd or villager in sight. Private Donnelly grinned. "Think it's a Taliban goat? Maybe it's spying on us." A couple of nearby soldiers snickered. That kind of gallows humor was our specialty. I played along, squinting at the goat. "Could be an enemy agent," I declared. "Maybe he's here to eat our uniforms and sabotage our mission." The goat bleated loudly at that, as if protesting. The men chuckled. In a place where every unknown bump in the night set us on edge, this goofy little animal was a welcome comic relief. "All right, let's not just stand here," I said. We carefully opened a gap in the wire. The goat didn't need much coaxing. One of the guys waved a half-eaten apple from lunch, and the animal trotted right in. Up close, he seemed young, maybe less than a year old. He nibbled the apple out of Private Lee's hand without fear. A tag hung from a frayed rope around his neck, but whatever was written on it was illegible. "Looks like he ditched his unit and went AWOL," joked Corporal Hernandez, patting the goat's bony side. The goat leaned into the attention, clearly enjoying the head scratches now coming from two soldiers at once. I shook my head in amusement. Of all things, our perimeter breach turned out to be a friendly goat seeking treats. At first, I was ready to shoo the goat away. We were in a combat zone, not old MacDonald's farm. Plus, keeping animals on base was against regulations. General Order Number 1 clearly forbade adopting any local animal as a pet or mascot. Army.mil. Command had drilled that into us. No feeding strays, no matter how cute, due to disease risks like rabies. If we got caught harboring this goat, we'd all be in hot water. I knew the rules. But as the goat gazed up at us with those curious eyes, I hesitated. The truth is, the morale at our FOB had been pretty low. We'd been out here for months with constant sand, sweat, and stress. Some of the younger guys hadn't had a good laugh or a reminder of home in too long. And here was this goofy creature practically volunteering to join our ranks. "Sarge, can we keep him?" Private Lee asked half-jokingly, as if the goat were a puppy his parents might let him adopt. A couple of others chimed in. "Come on, what's the harm? And we'll take care of him." I sighed, knowing it was a terrible idea. "You all realize if the CO finds out, he'll have our hides, right? We're not exactly equipped to run a petting zoo out here." The men stood there, grinning like kids on Christmas, awaiting my verdict. I rubbed a hand over my face, then found myself saying, "All right, fine, but on your heads be it." This goat is your responsibility. And for the love of Uncle Sam, keep him out of sight." A small cheer went up. It was probably the happiest I'd seen the platoon in weeks. Over a scruffy little goat. The first order of business was a name. "We gotta call him something," said Corporal Hernandez, crouching down to look the goat in the eye. Suggestions started flying. How about Belly? Predictable. What about Goatzilla? The goat was far too small for that. Private. Lee, who fancied himself a Western movie buff, piped up. He wandered in like a drifter. How about Billy the Kid? We all groaned at the pun, but it stuck. Billy the Kid, it was dotted first. Billy the Kid made himself right at home. We set up a little spot for him behind our barracks tent, shaded from the sun. One of the guys rigged up a crude pen using old wooden pallets and parachute cord. We gathered a few empty MRE boxes for him to chew or climb on. Honestly, the goat was living better than we were. He even got a piece of our precious stash of fresh vegetables from the weekly supply convoy. Billy quickly proved to be a natural morale officer. Each morning, he'd bleat eagerly when he saw us, like he was saying, "Good morning." The sight of tough soldiers cooing and petting a goat first thing every day was ridiculous. But darn if it didn't put smiles on faces, even our grumpiest. Squad mates would crack a grin when Billy trotted up to nuzzle their camel pants looking for a treat. Of course, it wasn't all sunshine. Goats will be goats, and Billy had a knack for finding trouble. Within a day, he had chewed through one of our clotheslines and eaten a pair of someone's dirty socks that were hanging on it. We later found him contentedly chewing on what remained of the sock like it was cud. "Damn it, Billy," became a common refrain around the camp whenever something went missing or got gnawed. If a document went missing or a stray glove couldn't be found, someone would joke, "Check Billy's stomach." One afternoon, Billy managed to sneak into our makeshift kitchen area, really just a corner of a tent with a single gas burner and some canned rations. Corporal Hernandez, who prided himself on whipping up gourmet meals from MRE ingredients, had left a pot of stew unattended for a minute. Big mistake. By the time we noticed, Billy had his front hooves up on the table and his snout in the pot, happily helping himself. He knocked the whole pot over when we shouted. We ended up with no stew, a goat reeking of gravy, and a very grumpy Hernandez. The rest of us couldn't stop laughing at the sight of Billy licking his chops amid the mess. Hernandez just threw his hands up, muttering about recon goats sabotaging our dinner. Then there was the night he nearly gave us all a heart attack. A couple weeks after Billy arrived, we were all asleep in our cots when suddenly the perimeter alarm started blaring. Red lights flashing, the whole 9 yards. We stumbled out of bed in a panic, grabbing rifles and scrambling into the darkness. In various states of undress, I was half expecting a full-on Taliban assault. Chaos reigned for a few minutes as everyone took defensive positions around the camp. Our hearts were pounding out of our chests. I remember crouching behind a stack of sandbags in my boots, boxers, and body armor, quite the fashion statement, scanning the night for any sign of the enemy. The alarm kept wailing. Then, over the noise, I heard an unmistakable sound. "Mamba, Oh, you have got to be kidding me," I groaned. I left Private Lee to man the sandbags and crept toward the motor pool area, where the racket seemed to be coming from. Sure enough, there was Billy, tangled in some cable and utterly freaked out. The silly goat had escaped his pen, wandered off exploring, and managed to snag himself on the tripwire of our early warning system. In his thrashing, he pulled the wire so hard it set off the alarm. I quickly radioed the all clear before someone started firing at ghosts. When the alarm finally cut off, an eerie silence fell, broken only by a chorus of exasperated sighs and a few choice curse words from the darkness. One by one, my comrades emerged, looking equal parts relieved and annoyed. We gathered around, The culprit, who had calmed down and was now chewing placidly on the very wire he'd tripped, as if nothing happened. "Billy, you nearly gave us a heart attack, you dumb goat," I scolded, unwrapping the wire from his little horns. He responded by nuzzling my arm, probably looking for a midnight snack. A ripple of laughter went through the group. The absurdity of it all. A platoon of grown men in full battle rattle, scrambling in the dead of night, only to find our intruder was our own pet goat. Hit us, and we cracked up. It felt good to laugh that hard again, even if we were laughing at ourselves. Done after that incident, we doubled our efforts to keep Billy out of trouble. We fortified his pen and even fashioned a sort of leash and harness from an old canvas strap so he could roam a bit under supervision. Private Lee took it upon himself to train Billy like a military working dog, which was ridiculous, but entertaining to watch. I'd catch Lay behind the tent, trying to teach the goat to heel or follow basic commands. Billy never really got the commands. He usually just tilted his head or tried to eat the training manual, but he did learn to follow Lee around, mainly because Lee always had treats in his pocket. In a way, that goat became Lee's battle buddy. Word about our unofficial mascot spread to the rest of the unit pretty fast, yet miraculously our commanding officer, Lieutenant Adams, didn't catch on immediately. Lieutenant Adams was a by-the-book kind of guy, and he spent most of his time in the Tactical Operations Center, radioing reports and sipping powdered coffee, not mingling with the enlisted unless he had to. We figured as long as we kept Billy away from the talk and official briefings, the LT might remain blissfully unaware. However, keeping a goat hidden on a tiny base is easier said than done. One afternoon, I was in the small makeshift gym we had. Just a few sandbags and a rusty weight set, when I heard a commotion near the helipad. I stepped out to see Billy running full tilt across the camp, hotly pursued by 2 soldiers. The goat had slipped his harness during a walk. Now here he was, hooves clattering on the hard-packed dirt, making a beeline toward the landing zone as a Chinook helicopter was inbound with supplies. My heart leapt into my throat. The last thing we needed was our goat wandering into rotor blades or spooking the pilot during landing. "Stop that goat," I bellowed, joining the chase. It must have been a sight for the arriving pilots, a squad of soldiers sprinting after a sprinting goat. Like some bizarre track meet dot, we managed to corner Billy behind a stack of crates just as the Chinook touched down. Dust swirled everywhere from the rotor wash. Specialist Patel grabbed Billy by the horns, while Private Lee secured the harness back on. The crew from the helicopter looked over at us in confusion. I just gave them a thumbs up and a half-hearted salute as if wrangling. A goat was all part of the plan. They shrugged and went about unloading, and we dragged our renegade mascot back to safety. By now, it was getting harder to keep Billy a secret. Too many close calls. A few of the higher-ups at Battalion HQ had even heard rumors a supply pilot may have let slip about seeing a goat on our fob. I got a stern radio call from our company first sergeant back at the main base. "Word is you boys adopted some kind of camp pet?" "You know that's against reg, Staff Sergeant." I played dumb. "No idea what you're talking about, First Sergeant," I replied, while Billy was literally chewing on my bootlaces as I spoke. The First Sergeant sighed and just said, "Keep it squared away out there," which I interpreted as fine, but don't let it become a problem. The reprieve didn't last long. A few weeks later came the event that nearly blew everything. Sky high, the Colonel's visit. Colonel McIntyre, our battalion commander, decided to do a tour of the remote outposts in our area. We spent 2 days prior cleaning every inch of the camp. Vehicles were lined up perfectly, gear stowed, sandbags straightened. Even the latrines got a fresh lime treatment. Lucky Colonel, we joked. The mood was anxious. A colonel's inspection could make or break reputations. Naturally, our biggest worry was how to keep one curious goat out of sight. We debated options. One suggestion was to temporarily move Billy outside the wire for the day, tie him up in the Wadi, dry creek, nearby until the coast was clear. But that felt too risky. If something happened and we weren't around, wild dogs, or Billy escaping into the desert, we'd never forgive ourselves. Another idea. Hide him in plain sight by claiming he was an operational asset. That gave birth to the most absurd plan of all. The morning of the Colonel's visit, we went into full subterfuge mode. We cleaned up Billy as best we could, gave him a thorough brushing, using an old hairbrush and some water, and even made a makeshift diaper out of a torn t-shirt, just in case he decided to answer nature's call at an inopportune moment, using some spare uniform scraps. The guys fashioned a tiny vest for Billy with an American flag patch on one side and a fake name tape reading Goat B on the other. To top it off, someone found an extra helmet from a broken training dummy and placed it on Billy's head. It was way too big and slid down over his eyes, but he looked ready for combat, or at least ready to cosplay as a soldier. We were in stitches, but it just might sell our cover story. Our plan, if you could call it that, was to pass Billy off as a sort of unit project, a goat we were trained to detect explosives. It was so crazy it might just confuse the Colonel long enough. Now, this wasn't entirely pulled from thin air. I'd heard some old stories about goats being used for various experiments, and I knew the Soviets had mine-detecting dogs in World War II. Why not a mine-detecting goat? We were banking on Colonel McIntyre either appreciating the creativity or being too perplexed to question it on the spot. When the Colonel's convoy rolled in, we snapped to attention. Out stepped Colonel McIntyre with his entourage, a grizzled man in his 50s with a chest full of ribbons. Lieutenant Adams started the tour, nervously showing off our clean motor pool and tidy living quarters. We trailed along, a cluster of nervous soldiers and one absurdly outfitted goat on a leash held by Private Lee. Billy trotted beside Lee, helmet askew, just another member of the squad. For a while, it actually worked. The Colonel was focused on our sandbag fortifications and asking about recent patrols. He even nodded approvingly at the state of the camp. Meanwhile, Billy stood there calmly, and because we had him somewhat behind the line of soldiers, McIntyre didn't notice that. First, I caught a few of the Colonel's staff glancing quizzically at the helmeted creature in our ranks, but discipline kept them silent. Then fate intervened. Just as we were moving toward the radio tent, Billy let out a loud, drawn-out bleat. Maybe he was bored of the formality, or the helmet had slipped further down over his eyes. Whatever the reason, the sudden "Mbaya" shattered the military stiffness of the moment. Colonel McIntyre stopped mid-sentence. What was that? He asked sharply, eyes narrowing. His gaze drifted down the line of soldiers and zeroed in on the source of the noise. There we were, a bunch of grown men caught red-handed with a goat in combat gear. I held my breath as the Colonel stepped forward, peering at Billy. The goat, perhaps sensing he was the center of attention, gave a gentle wag of his little tail. One of the Colonel's aides looked like he was about to burst out laughing, but kept it together. Lieutenant Adams cleared his throat. Sir, if I may introduce, this is Billy. He's part of our enhanced detection program. Enhanced detection? Are you kidding me, Lieutenant? The Colonel said, eyebrows climbing. His tone was dangerous. I jumped in, knowing I had to take the fall as the senior. NCO. Colonel, if I may explain, I said, standing at attention but bracing internally. Billy here is something of a locally sourced IED detector. We've been, training him to sniff out explosives. Improvised program. Figure a goat draws less suspicion from locals than dogs or metal detectors. McIntyre's face was unreadable. The silence hung heavy for a moment. A bead of sweat rolled down my back. Then, to my surprise, The colonel snorted. PH, that's a new one, he muttered. He walked a slow circle around Billy, who looked up at him innocently, chewing on nothing in particular. I've heard some creative field expedient ideas in my time, Sergeant, but a bomb-sniffing goat. The corners of his mouth twitched as if fighting a smile. Does it work? Now Lieutenant Adams looked like a deer in headlights. None of us expected the colonel to entertain the idea at all. Well, sir, I improvised, we haven't had a chance to fully deploy him on a live device. But he's shown a knack for finding things that are hidden. I was thinking of the time Billy sniffed out a stash of chocolate bars in a rucksack. The colonel stroked his chin. The tension eased as it became clear he wasn't furious, more bemused. Finally, he barked out a laugh. Well, I'll be damned. This is either the stupidest violation of general order one I've seen, or the damn funniest. We all exhaled, smiles creeping back. Colonel McIntyre gestured to Billy. Carry on with your go program, Sergeant. But make sure this doesn't end up on CNN. A collective chuckle spread through our group. Yes, sir, I said, grinning now. As the colonel moved on with the tour, shaking his head, but clearly amused, we fell back into formation. Private Lee gave Billy a proud pat as we walked on, whispering, Good job, buddy. Against all odds, our four-legged comrade had passed inspection, or at least been granted a bizarre exception. After the colonel's visit, Billy the Kid became semi-official. Oh, we still kept him out of obvious trouble, but the brass had essentially given a nod and a wink. Morale soared higher than ever. We even got permission to keep him when winter came, and we rotated back to the main base, on the condition that we arranged proper veterinary checks. One of the medics managed to give Billy some vaccinations, the perks of having a military working goat. Nobody wanted to see him taken away by the dreaded vector control teams that rounded up Stray's Army.mil. Billy was one of us now. On quiet nights, I'd sit outside under the desert stars with a cup of awful instant coffee, listening to Billy rustling around contentedly in his pen. Sometimes a few of the guys would join me, and we'd reminisce about home, about real pets we left behind or funny stories from training. Having Billy there, gently bleating or just being his goofy self, reminded us of simpler things beyond the war. It's amazing how a little creature could knit us together even tighter. We joked that the goat was the glue of our platoon dot in our final week before heading back stateside. We held an unofficial award ceremony for Billy. It was pure silliness. We fashioned a medal out of a bottle cap and some paracord and presented it to him in a mock formation. For contributions to unit morale and exceptional service in chewing up classified documents. So went the gag citation read aloud by Corporal Hernandez, doing his best parade ground voice. The whole platoon roared with laughter as we hung the makeshift medal around Billy's neck, which he tried to eat immediately. Of course, when it came time to leave the outpost, saying goodbye to Billy was surprisingly hard. In just a few months, that little goat had gone from a random intruder to our beloved comrade. But fear not, Billy's story didn't end there. One of our sister units taking over the FOB agreed to re-enlist him as their mascot until he could be transferred to a safe farm nearby Dot as we loaded up the trucks. Billy trotted alongside us, seemingly confused by all the activity. Private Lee knelt and gave him a big hug around the neck. Take care, buddy. You be a good boy, all right? Lee's voice was thick with emotion. I ruffled the fur between Billy's horns. You keep an eye on the new guys for us, I told him. The goat just sneezed and shook his head, a comical little salute in its own way. With that, we left Billy in the capable hands of the incoming platoon, who looked amused and maybe a touch honored to inherit the legendary Camp Goat. And true to their word, that unit took good care of Billy. A few months later, I got word that they'd worked with a local farmer to adopt him. giving Billy a peaceful retirement munching on grass instead of camouflage. Back home, when I recount this tale, I always laugh at the disbelief on people's faces. A goat? In the army? They think I'm pulling their leg until I show them a photo of me and Billy the Kid standing proudly in front of our dusty FOB flag. My buddies from the service still joke with me, calling me Goat Whisperer or asking when I'll start a petting zoo for the army. And honestly, out of all the serious war stories we could tell, this one remains a favorite. In fact, whenever a few of us from the old squad get together, someone inevitably asks me to tell the goat story again. And we all crack up like it's the first time. That scruffy goat did more than give us a few funny stories, he reminded us that even in the worst of times, friendship and laughter can show up in the most unexpected shapes. Sometimes it might even have hooves and a helmet. And whenever I think of my time out there, I can't help but smile and remember our motto. That emerged from the whole fiasco. No goat left behind.